There we go. Okay. Okay. So, hello everyone in the room. There's only 4 people in the room. Hopefully more people will come along pretty soon. And to all of you online, welcome. In this session, oh, sorry, I'll stand by the microphone. In this session, I'm going to talk about the first assignment, the essay. So yesterday, I tried to get through like 88 people, giving them one-to-one advice. It was quite long, but I think we got through it. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about, just for one final time, and I'm going to record this to talk about this essay. So this is lecture 6 for International HRM. My name is Scott Tyndall. If you need to contact me, that's my email address, s.r.tyndall@greenwich.ac.uk. And by the end of this session, we're going to talk about the essay requirements. We're going to talk about where to find resources to help you with your writing. We're going to look a little bit about what it means to write analytically, although we've covered this a few times now, and also about how to create arguments. So that's the outcomes for today. Right. I just wanted to start by making clear how this assignment fits into the learning outcomes of this module. So what we have here are a summary of what you are supposed to be learning in this module as a whole. So the first outcome is you're supposed to be able to, by the end of this module, demonstrate knowledge of the main theoretical frameworks influencing human resource management practice. And to demonstrate, so the second is to critically evaluate best practice and strategic areas of HRM, including resourcing, reward, performance management, training, development, employee relations, and some other stuff. And to apply this knowledge of international and comparative aspects to HRM to contemporary issues, such as multinationals, global mobility, global talent management, and so on. So that's what you're supposed to be learning overall. But what we are basically doing now is we're trying to cover the first one. So this is the theory, basically. So what the essay tries to do, actually what the essay is trying to do, is it's trying to basically give you the opportunity to demonstrate your knowledge of the main theoretical frameworks influencing human resource management in a global context. So that's topic 1, that's the theory. And that's also what we've now just finished. So we've just now finished topic 1. What we're going to go on to starting next week is some of the functions, and that's that one. That's the second learning outcome there. And at the end, we're going to cover some contemporary issues. So if you remember, every couple of weeks, I probably show you this, like topic 1, 2, 3, and we've now basically finished topic 1, which is the theory part. So that's what is going to be assessed. The assessment, basically, to measure the learning outcomes for assessment 1 is to measure your ability to demonstrate this knowledge of the main theoretical frameworks influencing HRM. That is what we're going to be doing in this essay. So that is the context of why you're doing this. Now, some practical things. The first is, do not be confused, because there's a relic date from last year for November. Ignore that. That's just a hangover from last year. The deadline is the 21st of December 2021. That's what it is in the module handbook. It's what it is on Turnitin. That is the assessment deadline. Please submit before, ideally well before this, but the cutoff is 11:30 at night. But try and do it earlier in the day, just in case there's any problems at all. You can always contact IT, but if you're doing it at 11:30, you can't. That's the deadline. It focuses on the academic parts of this module, and there are 2 questions to answer. In total, it should be no more than 2,000 words plus or minus 10%, and it is worth 50% of your overall module grade. So this essay is half of your total module grade for this module. Okay, all of this is not new. You should all kind of be vaguely familiar with some of these details. Now, question 1. What are the different conceptual approaches that HRM academics can take when examining HR within an international context? Illustrate your answer with reference to conceptual ideas and empirical evidence from the literature. That is the question. This ultimately, and this connection should be made very, very clear, is this question is asking you really about these 3 things that we've been talking about over the last couple of weeks. there are three camps of human resource management scholars. The first camp are those who are called the cultural approach, sometimes called cross-cultural approach. This is a group of people who are very interested in how cultural norms and values and practices and so on shape HR policy and practice in an international context. They are very interested in how these sort of cultural dimensions that manifest themselves in how HR is done in different countries. That's the first group. The second group of people are called the institutional approach. It's sometimes called the comparative approach. Sometimes I've seen it being called the system approach. But do not be confused, they're the same thing. This is a group of people who will say, culture is so wishy-washy, you know, it's all about like norms and practices. Well, that's one thing. But what really matters for these organizations are the institutions that surround them. All organizations don't just exist in a complete social vacuum where, you know, the organization alone can decide how we're going to do recruitment and selection or how it is that we're going to pay and reward people. No, they exist in societies. Every organization exists in a society which is surrounded by institutions. It may be trade unions, it may be education systems. Different countries have different capitalist systems. They've got different political systems. They've got different legislative environments, that is, laws. All of these things will shape what an organization can and cannot do. And we looked at that a few weeks ago with reference to different laws around diversity, I think, around equality. And we had a little think about, well, what does that mean for recruitment and selection? That's an institution. Legislation is an institution. That's the second. The third group of people are called international HRM approaches, sometimes called global HRM approaches, sometimes called multinational approaches. Again, they get called different names, but they are very interested in what multinationals do. They dominate the economy globally. They are found in lots of countries. They have an impact on what happens in different countries in their same organization. Multinationals also shape HR policy and practice norms. These type of people tend to do case studies of specific organizations. So you'll see three groups, and you can tell where they're from, because either they're a group of people that's talking about culture and how it's shaping HR, they're a group of people who are trying to compare, you know, legislation or whatever in different countries, or they're a group of people who are interested in what multinationals are doing, and they tend to be case studies of single organizations. We've been talking about that for a number of weeks now in a little bit of detail. I'm not going to obviously crash through the different theories and stuff, but that is essentially what this question is asking. It's asking about this. So that's that. So your essay will definitely for sure have to talk about those three things at least a little bit, although I'll talk about that, you should focus on one. So I also want to point out before we go, before we move on, is there's two other things. So it's not just asking what are the different conceptual approaches HRM academics can take, because in which case you could just say that, what I've just said, you could just fling in a couple of references and there you've done it. But no, the question is also asking you have to make reference to conceptual ideas and empirical evidence. So let's think about a possible structure then. This is not compulsory. This is just how I personally, as an individual, you know, would answer this question. You might do something slightly different, and that's okay. Students have done stuff slightly different in the past. It doesn't mean anything that, you know, it's not like if you do all of this in this order, you'll get like the top marks. No, it's not like that. This is my advice on how I would do this. I would personally start with a very, very short but critical definition of what we mean by international HRM. You can just use textbooks. You can just use the Brewster text or anything else that's international HRM. Quite close to the beginning, somewhere in the first couple of pages, there should be a definition of what is meant by international HRM. But do it a bit critically. Say, like, according to Brewster, HRM is the policy and practice of human resources in an international organization. Okay, fine. But that's a bit descriptive. You've got to be a little bit critical too, saying, this definition only really looks at policy and practice. It doesn't think about international HRM as an academic discipline, or this definition puts too much focus on multinationals. Very short, just a couple of sentences, or this is a very good definition because it covers lots of things, blah, blah, blah. It will depend, what you say will be dependent on A, your source, and B, your own thoughts of it. But that short little sentence knows like, okay, you've seen that this is the definition, but I'm engaging with it a little bit. That's the first paragraph. It is going to be like 3 sentences or something, really not long. In fact, even that might be too much. The second paragraph would be to outline these 3 approaches of international HRM, the ones that I've just talked about, the cultural, the institution, and the multinational. It doesn't have to be super, super long. It should be a decent sized paragraph. You would only need to really cite the textbook again. You don't really need to go beyond that because it's more or less just factually this is how it looks. So that would be your second paragraph to kind of outline basically that, what I've just said there. But it's also asking you, if you remember from just 1 second ago, it's asking you to make reference to conceptual ideas and empirical evidence. So now we need to do that. So I would suggest that you would either say that your essay focuses on culture approaches, here at the top, or institutional ones. Why would I not say this one here, the one about multinationals? Because literally it's what we're going to start doing next week, and then it covers more or less the whole rest of the module is what multinationals are doing. And these, so let's just park that to the side for the moment, because essentially the second assignment, the report, looks at the multinational stuff. So I would suggest just focusing on ideally cultural or institutional, because we've been talking about it. So yeah, but say, you know, whilst it's recognized that these 3 approaches, this essay is going to focus on culture, or it's going to focus on institutions. And you just have to say a brief sentence about why. So, I'm going to focus on culture because there's a lot of research looking at how culture shapes, human resource management practices, blah, blah, blah. Or institutions are very important for understanding what organizations can and cannot do in different contexts. It's a very short statement. It's just a signpost saying, look, I recognize that there are 3 here, but I'm just going to look at this one. That's all you're doing to the reader. Then you would also say, whilst I recognize that there are, let's just say you're going to do a cultural approach. I recognize that there are a number of different cultural, like theories for culture. For example, there's Globe, Trumpenars, Hall, blah, blah, blah. You've probably heard most of them by now. But say I'm going to focus on, for example, I know lots of you will do this because you've done it before, Hofstede. So this essay recognizes there are 3 there are 3 approaches. We're going to focus on culture because it's really important to understanding what the kind of practices in multinationals. There are a number of different theories trying to theorize culture. For example, Trumpenars, Hall, Globe. But this essay is going to focus on Hofstede because it's one of the most influential. So a little short paragraph like that, that's paragraph 3, is kind of just signposting the reader to several things. Look, I know there's other stuff there, but you can't possibly in 1,000 words talk about all theories and all. That's just impossible. So just say, like, I recognize there's other stuff there, but we're going to focus on just this one and why. That's all you have to do. It'll be like a couple of sentences again. Paragraph 4 is you would then outline the theory. So let's just say you're going to talk about, so some of the big theories that we have will be like Hofstede, Globe, the Trumpenars. If you're interested in institutions, you have varieties of capitalism and varieties of employment relations. We do a little bit more of that later on when we talk about employee relations. But these are some of the more common ones that people use. So let's just say, because I know lots of you will be doing this, let's just say you're going to talk about Hofstede. Then you outline Hofstede in a short paragraph again. You will not need to go into all the ins and outs of it, but you can give a little bit of context about where this theory comes from, the 6 dimensions that they create, and a few other little bits that you will get. That's fine. You should also be critical. So we don't just accept things for what they are. You know, you have to kind of challenge it and think, well, what does this mean? So you can outline a short critique of that theory. And a couple of weeks ago, I pointed on Moodle to you, if you're being taught by me in a tutorial, that if you go on Moodle under week 3, for example, you'll find a paper called McSweeney. It's a really, really, really famous critique of Hofstede. I think it's called something like A Triumph of Belief, a Failure of Analysis. You can use that. That's, I mean, it's really influential. That's fine. Just look at some of the key points that the authors are making and think, oh yeah, I agree with these ones the most, and you can talk about it. It's not going to be the entire like massive long critique, because there's a lot of critique about any theory basically, but just a short paragraph saying, look, we recognize that whilst this theory might be useful, there are limits and problems with it. And then you can take one, if you want to feel ambitious, you could try for two, but it's better to do one well than two badly. But take just one empirical paper where, for example, an author has used Hofstede to talk about something related to HR, because ultimately we're interested in why these theories can be used to help us explain why there's differences in HR in different contexts. And I just want to very quickly move on to onto Moodle, and just say, like, for example, if you go to the week 3, the cultural lens, you'll see a terrifying long list of additional reading. But if you look, I give little descriptions of what they're about. So, for example, here in 2005, Chiang 2005, a critical examination of Hofstede's thesis and application to reward management. So this is somebody who is doing a cross-cultural comparison of 4 different countries. I can't remember what they all are. I think it's Australia, Hong Kong. I can't remember the other 2. I think this is this one. But what he's interested in is, well, how does things like collectivism or power distance, how do they help explain reward preferences? That is, preferences to different types of bonuses or pay packages in different countries. So there's just one. There's a whole bunch of them. You can choose something that you're interested in. Of course, if you're going to talk about Hofstede, it has to be a paper that's used Hofstede, you know, to talk about HR, and then you're done. If you're interested in institutions, you can just do the same thing. You have, for example, varieties of capitalism, short critique of varieties of capitalism, and then an empirical paper that has used that theory to talk about something related to HR. So yeah, the little thing in green is to say that that would relate to the empirical evidence part, and then the bit in red, well, basically meets that criteria for conceptual ideas. So in which case you've then done everything. You'll have talked about these 3 approaches, you're going to focus on one, and of course you'll never talk about all concepts or all theories. That's like literally entire books are written about that. But you can talk about one. And the same likewise, you're not going to talk about all empirical evidence. That's just like literally tens of thousands of papers. No, you can just talk about one. That would be it. That is a possible structure for essay question 1. Right, I'm just going to quickly check to see if there's any questions. Are there any questions from either in the room now, there's more people in the room, or online? Or should I move on to question 2? Okay, good. Right, good. So far, so good. Again, this is recorded, so you can go back. I'm recording this and I'll put it on Moodle later on today. Okay, the second question then is this. Globalization means that eventually HR policy and practice will converge into a single best practice everywhere in the world. Discuss and evaluate this claim. Illustrate your answer with reference to conceptual ideas and empirical evidence. Sorry, evidence from the literature. Now, this, if you've been paying attention, is a question ultimately about this idea of convergence or divergence. So, oops. On the convergence side, and you heard this, I think, last week from Alex, but we keep talking about it before that. This wouldn't have been the first time. The convergence view is this. It's a very American view. It's sometimes called the universalist view because they think it will be applicable everywhere, universally. So that's a concept. Concepts are like convergence, universalism. These are concepts, right? Best practice. The convergence view is this. Globalization, that is the movement of goods, people, capital, ideas globally across boundaries and national borders. It means that, so globalization, developments in technology, which we're all shaped by, and market competition globally means that you'll eventually converge into a single best practice, the best way of doing recruitment and selection, or the best way of doing performance management or appraisals. This is a view that's very dominant in America, and most HRM textbooks, so not international, just normal, they always blab on about what's the best practice or the best way of doing this, the best way of doing that. That's how they talk. Anyone who talks in that way, that's a very universalist view. That's the view ultimately of convergence, that there is a best practice there, and our job everywhere in the world is to try and get as close to that best practice as possible. The divergence view says no, that's just silly. Because what is best practice in one country might be actually quite counterproductive in another. In fact, it might not even be counterproductive, it might even be illegal in another country. We talked about that a few weeks ago as well. So the divergence people, sometimes called contextualists, because they think context matters, they say, look, no, cultural norms and values and institutions, particularly legislation, are so strong and have such a strong influence that it's never ever going to be possible to converge into a single best practice. There will always be divergences. And therefore, you're not really looking for best practice. What you're really looking for is best fit. That's the sum of the argument. We talked about that in week 1, and Alex would have talked about that last week. So how might I go about doing this? Well, I would, of course, you're going to use some of these concepts. So like things like convergence and divergence, these are concepts. They don't like physically exist, right? They're just like an idea. So I would do the same. What do you mean by convergence? So paragraph 1, outline the convergence side of the debate, where it comes from and what the argument implies. Define what we mean by convergence briefly. You can also critically analyze one empirical paper, and I'll show you where to find that, for convergence. You outline saying, so that's argument A, and then outline the divergence side of the debate, what they basically say, define what we mean by divergence, because that's also a concept, and then critically analyze one empirical paper that looks at divergence. Now, you then at the end, sorry, ignore part 5. At the end, you will develop an argument outlining your own view. So you have argument A, and here's some evidence for A. There's argument B, here's some evidence for B. And I'm going to, this is my view. Why do we have to do that? Because it asks you, discuss and evaluate that claim here. So it wants you to talk about it. There's argument A, argument B, but it wants you to come up with a view. So that's that. Ignore, oops. There is, sorry, 2 seconds, just going to go back to middle. Okay. If you go to last week, there we go. On week 5, there's the convergence divergence debate, and there's a bunch of papers. And a nice easy read is Brewster. His name appears a lot, so it's not the textbook. That's called European Perspectives on Human Resource Management, and it looks in that paper. There's a little chat about quite a long chat about the convergence divergence debate. There's another one here, Boudoir is an Asia-Pacific perspective. There's one there, Schuler and Tariq, 2007, is from North American perspective. You can use them, but also you can see what kind of paper they're citing. So when you see Brewster talking about, oh, the convergence argument is this, Brewster will reference stuff. You can just go and look at those references, so you can piggyback on what they say. You don't need a huge number of references for this. I would say that you might have the Brewster text, you will have something for example, Hofstede, McSweeney for the criticism, and then the one empirical paper. And then for the second one, you might only have 2 for each side, so it's another 4. So you're looking at something like maybe seven references, something like this. It doesn't need to, it's better to have a smaller number of references that are actually well used rather than 100 that's just like a scattergun. Academia is more like surgery. It's got to be precise and sort of clinical. You're not just like a shotgun spraying references everywhere. So that's that. I'm just going to quickly check the questions. Okay, good. Right. Let's talk a little bit now. Has anyone got any questions about that? Okay, good. The marking criteria. So I showed you this in week 1, but you probably ignored it because it just seems so far away. But there are 4 criteria. The first one is to understand key concepts. So I've basically, in this lecture, linked the question to the exact concepts you'll use. So there's not really a secret there. But your answer, a really good answer, is one that demonstrates an understanding of the topic. It uses relevant key concepts that are explained and then applied, that's the empirical stuff, in a practical way. And if you kind of follow my essay advice, my structure, then you actually will meet that. Define what you mean by convergence, define what you mean by this. That shows you're using the correct terms and you also understand them. Critical engagement with the relevant literature. So again, it's got to be relevant. So if, for example, you talk about Hofstede and how it's relevant to HR, it's got to be a paper that has used Hofstede to talk about an HR issue. The critical stuff I'll talk about in 1 minute. So it should be relevant and appropriate academic literature. So not something from like the Journal of Agricultural Sciences, just because somebody's used the word Hofstede in it. No, it's got to be really relevant. You feel free to use the stuff that I recommend on Moodle. You can go beyond that, but it's not like, it doesn't really change anything manifestly if you've used something that I've recommended on Moodle or you found something else. It's not going to really make a difference. It's not like I'm going to get marked down because I've used something on that I've basically recommended. No, not at all. Anyway, but you're using relevant and appropriate academic literature to support the argument. You've demonstrated awareness of the types of debates and the findings from empirical literature. So again, when you show awareness of the debates, it's like argument A, argument B. I understand what they're both saying, and this is my view of it. And findings from literature. So again, when you're finding these papers, you're meeting this criteria. And when you're finding them and talking about them, you meet this criteria. Appropriate use of examples to consider and explore problems. So again, actually, this more or less follows on from the previous one, to be honest, which is like, for example, the convergence divergence one. By saying this is the convergence view and this is some of the evidence for it, then the evidence is using an appropriate example to consider this issue, for example, between convergence divergence. So a good answer is one that is appropriate use of empirical and, well, it says case study materials. That's not applicable for this assignment. That's the next assignment. So it's appropriate use of empirical materials provided in the module and wider literature to support and develop insights into these questions. You can use examples of HR functions to illustrate conceptual or theoretical ideas. So this is ultimately why it's so important to ultimately use these empirical papers to demonstrate. By empirical, just to be very clear, I mean papers that are based on observation. If you did my module last year, we talked about that in lecture 1. So if you want to remind yourself, what does it mean to be empirical? Go back to lecture 1 of my business research methods module, because I talk about it. But ultimately, it means one that is based on observation of the world around us. So it might be qualitative, in which case it's through words or images, or it might be quantitative through numbers, but it's empirical. It's using observation of the world, it collects observations of the world, and it presents it as evidence. Finally, clarity of structure and referencing. So it should really be clearly presented. The standard of academic English should be very high. If you want, it should be very high. Harvard referencing style should be used throughout. Some people think they're using the Harvard reference style correctly, but I'll tell you for a fact that lots of people do not. There's a guide on the university website. The problem partly is that the Harvard style has several different versions of it. So the versions, for example, on Google Scholar is not what we would consider as the Harvard style. Please, I've got a resource. In fact, I'll show you where it is right now. On study skills, there's here under study skills, there's a little library help guide on how to reference in the Harvard style. These things kind of matter now, because this year you're going to have to make sure that your writing is neat, it's succinct. You're not just going to say, like, in this essay I argue that in 6 words. No, that's just ridiculous number of words. It's this essay argues. It's got to be really, really concise, really well written, all the way through. There we go. That's the marking criteria. Now, I wanted to race through that because I want to say a few words, sorry, let me just make that bigger, about critical analysis. We all kind of know at this stage what it kind of means. It's really difficult to just know it. It's a skill that we all learn, and we all are continuously learning how to be ever more critical and ever more analytical. But I just want to say a few things about this, because this year it will matter. Analysis, when you talk about analyzing something, you mean, what you're kind of meaning is to break something down into its constituent parts and to examine them. So if we were to analyze a journal paper, what we mean by that is we are going to take out like what were the methods they used, or what's the concepts that they used, what's their key findings. You're sort of pulling it apart, and then you're trying to. So do you know what I mean? Like this paper, like it's got a bunch of concepts it's using. Let's just say it's something about well-being. Okay, it's using well-being as a concept. Well, how do they define well-being? Okay, that's another concept here. What methods did they use? Okay, what country was that they took the data from? How many people did they interview? Like you sort of, and then what was their findings? Does the findings seem to what they claim to found match the evidence? Scroll down, what do they see as the key limitations? Like it just means to pull something apart. Like to analyze something is to pull it apart. If I was to analyze this cup, it would literally involve me like taking bits apart from it and like examining each one in turn. Like I would then like have an analysis of this and then this and this and how it all works together. You can do it with machines as well. To be critical is to do something else. It's to evaluate, to pass judgment. As Parker and Moore in 2012 says, the careful, deliberate determination of whether one should accept, reject, or suspend judgment about a claim and the degree of confidence to which one accepts or rejects it. It's ultimately, it's a judgment. I will give you an example of this. So like with my little silly example with the cup, let's just imagine I'm a food critic, right? And I go into a restaurant and I have the soup and I write an article. I say, I went to a restaurant and ate tomato soup. That's not a good critic. It's just silly. What the comment would get is, that's very descriptive. I went into the restaurant and the seats were made of green leather and I ate tomato soup and the spoon was silver. That's just description. And you'll probably maybe getting feedback in previous years about this is too descriptive. Maybe, especially if you're in like the 60s area, maybe high 60s, and you're wondering why can't I get? The comments are likely to be something like, it's too descriptive. Instead, you say something like, going back to the soup analogy, it's like, the soup was really good. It was quite floral, a little bit sweet for my taste, but actually it's relatively okay. If you're somebody who likes a lot of basil in it, this might be okay. That's like passing judgment. And likewise, you might say about an article, like actually some of the methods are really good. It's a really big study, but actually I'm not super sure that the conceptualization was great for this. And you might think, because something is published, it means it's very good. When you get further through if you ever go on to do a master's, or if any of you end up in a PhD or beyond, you very quickly realize that lots of stuff that's published, even if it's very good, there's always stuff you can say about it that's good or not good. So the study does this particularly well, but there's other stuff it doesn't do well. It gets very hard to pass some of these judgments, but you've got to kind of engage with it a bit more. And we did a little bit of that in week 1. Remember when we looked at the different definitions of international HR? Remember, and we said, well, what's good about it, what's not good, what's common between them, like what's common between this definition and that, what's different about them, what is particularly stronger, why do you think one is stronger than another? That's kind of critical thinking. You're trying to evaluate and pass judgment. So critical analysis is to basically break something down into its constituent parts, examine them in turn, and make some sort of comment about it. Good? Good. My food critic example. Yeah, because I had to put the picture in, otherwise I would have forgotten about it. I went to a restaurant and I had a steak and onion rings and something in a little pan and a glass of wine and something that looks mushy here. You don't say that, that's just description. You got to, even when you're analyzing soup, you say like, this soup is like got tomatoes in it, it's also heavy in basil, it's a little bit sweet. That's still analyzing, you've got components within it. So that's that. And I wanted to give a little example that's not so kind of silly as restaurants. But let's look at a definition together right now. Very quick exercise, just so you kind of get your brain into it again. What is individualism? Well, individualism is a concept that Hofstede uses, so I use this because I think you'll be familiar with it, right? So let's see. On Hofstede 2001, page 225, he defines individualism as this. Individualism stands for a society in which ties between individuals are loose. Everyone is expected to look after his or her immediate family only. That is on page 225 of Hofstede 2001, the definition of individualism. Analysis then. According to this definition, individualism has 2 attributes. So I'm going to pull this sentence apart, this very brief sentence. First, So the first part of his definition says that individual connections to each other are not strong, or they're transient, like what he calls loose. They're loose ties. So either they mean that they're not very strong connections between people, or that they might be strong but they don't last for like long periods of time. The second part that I notice is that individuals only look after their own immediate family. That's also what he says there. Everyone is expected only to look after his or her own immediate family. So the analysis of this definition has two components. Individuals look after the ties between individuals are not strong, and people only look after their own immediate family. That's like me pulling apart this cup. You know, there's two parts to the sentence. Of course, if you've got a longer definition, then it might have like multiple parts to it that need to be dissected. This is a short one. It's just got two parts. But what about a critique of this? Well, I say, what about, normally individualism has some other characteristics. Sometimes people talk about individualistic societies as one which is based on individual achievement, about self-sufficiency, the fact that in most individualist societies you tend to leave home relatively young, go to university and then tend not to go back. You tend to be kind of self-reliant, that my money is my own money, I don't rely on my parents to fund me in any way. That's normally what people think about individualism, but there's nothing there about that. It just says ties between individuals are loose. So what about individual achievement or self-sufficiency, financial self-sufficiency? Or here's another critique. It says look after his or her own immediate family, but then that raises another question: what constitutes an immediate family? For me, my immediate family might just be like mum, dad, my brother and sister, but for other people it might also include grandparents or even close, like aunts and uncles that are close to them. So what my immediate family means might be different from what yours means. So there's a very little short example of like how you think analytically, critically. That makes sense? I've recorded it so you can listen again if you want to listen, if you want to hear what I've just said again. Okay. Oh, good. We're going to actually make it this time. I was a bit apprehensive that I was going to run out of time because I feel like I really want to convey some of these messages again. I want to talk a little bit about constructing arguments. When you are writing, you should write in paragraphs. It sounds really remarkable, I'd have to say, but actually lots of students don't. You end up with really long blocks of text. It's actually better, in English language, it's actually better to have, like paragraphs can be quite short. If you look at journal articles or textbooks, you'll actually notice there might only be like 3 or 4 sentences. It's quite rare in English to have like a paragraph that goes on for like 3/4 of a page. So observe like actually every paragraph should contain a single point, not more or less. Literally one paragraph is a point, and it typically has 2 types of statement within them. This might be the first time you're hearing this, but this is going to be a trick. I'm telling you like a secret on how to write. The 2 types of statement are, one, claim statements. It asserts something to be true. It has to be true, and it follows from evidence. So you get statements of claim, which is like, I'm going to just claim like this cup is pink and black, right? It's just that's a claim statement. The second is called an evidence statement, something that is used to support that claim. Like, well, why is it pink and black? And I say something about the qualities of light or the pigment in this plastic thing, then I can then say that's the reason why it's pink or black. If you look very carefully at journal articles, or actually, to be honest, most writing that's written in proper paragraphs, is that you'll see that they either start with a claim statement or they end with a claim statement. I actually am not joking. Go away and have a look at something that, just anything almost, and you will notice, and just look at the difference. What is the claim and what is the evidence? And you'll see that they either start with a claim or end with a claim. And I will tell you another secret. When we are power reading through articles, I mean, sometimes you might read like 3, 4, 5, 6 articles a day. How people like me would do it, if you're just doing it very quickly, is you actually just read the first sentence of every paragraph, because it should be the claim statement. I don't need, as long as I can just trust that the evidence is correct, you can just read the first, you should be able to just follow an argument by reading the first sentence of every paragraph. Anyway, let's look at an example now, right? So this is just a kind of silly example. I just took this because I actually did some research a few years ago about Scottish independence, right? And opinion polls. While rejected in 2014, it now appears that in 2021, those living in Scotland have still not changed their mind about the creation of a new Scottish state. Since January 2021, there have been 40 opinion polls which have asked Scottish electors, should Scotland be an independent country? Of those 40 polls, the average support for independence is about 46. This is around about the same as it was in 2014 at the time of the referendum. That's a paragraph. This is the claim. So whilst rejected in 2014, it now appears that in 2021, those living in Scotland have still not changed their mind about the creation of a new Scottish state. That's me making a claim statement and saying something is true. This bit at the bottom is the evidence. So I basically then cite, well, there's been 40 opinion polls since January 2021, and of those 40, the average support is about 46%, roughly the same as what it was. It seems that it's not changed. That's a paragraph. That's a good paragraph. I mean, it's a bit silly, but it's a good paragraph. It's got a claim and it's got evidence. If you end up writing loads of claim statements, especially if you just put them all in the same paragraph, claim, 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 then you're going to get comments from your markers saying something like, where's the evidence, or support this claim. Maybe you've seen that kind of comment. That's what they're meaning. You're just making a bunch of claims. You should say like, oh, you know, Tyndall et al. 2020 argues that, blah, blah, blah. And then that's fine, you've made a claim. This is based on their work with, you know, 20 supermarket workers, da, 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 da. So you can take a bit more from what you're reading, and then you've supported it with a bit more evidence. Does that make sense? That claim? Good. Excellent. Now, I got to the end. Oh, we're going to make it. Good. I was actually quite apprehensive. Okay, good. There's some like little secrets about like how to write and how to construct paragraphs and stuff. I've recorded this. I keep saying this, but just to remind you, I've recorded this so you can listen again as many times as you want. I wanted to just finally end by saying on November the 17th, between 8:30 and 12:15, we have a business breakfast. Has anyone been to one before in their first year? Yeah, we haven't done them for a long time now because of COVID, and we all miss them because it kind of helps create this sense of community because staff come, students come, postgraduates come, the PhD students come. We all kind of like come together. I'm not super sure how the format will look this year, but basically, if you want free tea and coffee and orange juice and free pastries and other bits and pieces, then on Wednesday the 17th, I'll send out reminders about this, between 8:30 and 12:15, we have the business breakfast. You can have free food. You can meet with your personal tutor. You can catch up with your lecturers, including me, because I'm going to be going there for bits of it. We'll invite the dissertation supervisors, will all be invited and should come, although maybe not for the whole time. You can meet with the employability office. You can meet with an employability advisor. You can earn passport points if you still collect them. You might be saying, some of this time is in the time that we have our tutorials. That's true. So I'm going to think about a way that we can do something in classroom, and then we'll just go piling on for cakes and tea afterwards. So that's on November the 17th, 8:30 to 12:15. Soon, you'll get a list of who the staff is going to be attending, so you can try and see if you can work out if your dissertation supervisor or personal tutor is there or anyone else. I'm going to be there, and we just chat. It's very informal, but you can ask questions about work, as in your studies, about your assignments, about working in general, and it's quite relaxed and fun. That's all I wanted to. Oh no, it's not all I wanted to say. Sorry, it's not. That's a lie. There is a few other bits and pieces to say. One is, the library has a whole bunch of workshops, including like how to write arguments, how to take notes when you're reading, how to find stuff. You can even book one-to-one sessions with writing fellows, and their job, if you do that, you can have a 50-minute session. You can bring work, you can talk about how to improve work. They can't proofread, but you'll chat about how to make writing more succinct, like, oh, you're using too many words, or actually the reference would be better in this way. There's a whole bunch of them called study skills. Have a look at it. You've got lots of time between now and December but also for you, anything this year, to be honest, like have a look at some of the sessions, because some of them are actually quite good. Students that go on it tend to think it's really, really helpful. Like my little crash course that I give you on like writing, that's the kind of stuff that they go over. The second is referencing. Please, please, please make sure it's in Harvard referencing, because you can start like damaging your grade actively through not referencing properly in text and in the end. I know in first and second year it's less important. It's really important now. And then at the end, the university has a subscription to something called Studiosity. It's a proofreading service. They can't comment on the topic because they might not know that, but they can comment on like grammar and stuff. That's called studiosity. You can use that. I think the turnaround is like 4 or 6 hours. You send it off and 4 hours later, you get comments back there. And then at the end, if you've got any mental health, well-being or counseling issues, speak to your personal tutor, or this university has some well-being services. Okay, that's all I wanted to say this week. Thank you very much. That's now your briefing for the first assessment. Next week, we're going to start a new topic, topic 2, which is functions. So we're kind of like, for those of you who have thought this has been a bit of a nightmare, like thinking about ideas and concepts, then we're about to leave it behind for a while, although some of them keep coming back, like convergence, divergence. But for now, you can rest. Next week, we're going to start talking about multinational corporations. Before you go out the door, I just want to ask, is anyone online or face-to-face got any final questions? Oh, okay. Right. Oh, Gaia, do you have a question?
Yes.
Okay, go for it. You ask and I'm going to load up the thing.
Okay, so it's about part 2 of the essay and the suggested structure that you
Yeah, you have
gave
to
us.
a little bit quicker, sorry, because we're going to have to leave. So quick.
Yeah, regarding our own view.
Yep, yes.
So we have to write a couple of sentences regarding our own view, how convergence and divergence influence international human resource management.